In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw cat eyes with colored pencils. We'll start on a white sheet of Stonehenge paper with a light graphite sketch. And we'll begin by laying down a light blue initially. This blue is cloud blue. Now I'll be using mostly Prismacolor Premier pencils for this demonstration, but I'll also use a couple of Polychromos oil-based pencils closer to the end. Then on top of the cloud blue, we'll layer down an application of true green. Here initially at the beginning of the process, we're just getting some colors in place on the surface. The key to mastering colored pencils is mastering the process of layering colored pencils. It's the layering that allows us to build up solid applications of color that eventually look realistic and representational. Now over the top of this application, we'll apply a bit of jade green before moving on to a bit of indigo blue. With the indigo blue applications, we'll slowly start to build up some of the darker values. We want to create a high level of contrast throughout the drawing, but we want to do so gradually. Sometimes it's tempting to jump right into those darker values right from the start, but with colored pencils, it's a good idea to start with our lighter values and our lighter colors first and progressively get darker with our applications. Now we've moved on to another color, and in this case we're using a bit of lime peel. At this point, all of our applications have been rather light. We're not putting a whole lot of pressure on the pencil since we're just trying to get some colors in place. And now that we've got some of our initial light applications in place, we'll go back and burnish this application using a colorless blender. A colorless blender is simply a colored pencil that is absent of pigment, so it still has the wax binder inside of it. As we apply this pencil, some of the colors will mix together, and more importantly, we're creating a waxy base on the surface to apply additional colors. For now, we'll move on to the pupil of the eye and first address it with an application of dark umber. Over the top of this application, we'll apply a bit of indigo blue. The combination of dark umber and indigo blue will lead to a more natural looking black. I've found that the black that comes in the Prismacolor Premier line is very strong and can make a drawing look flat. Now we'll move on and add a bit more color to the area around the pupil and address some of the colors that exist in the iris. A bit of blue-violet is added here, mainly in the areas of darker value and tone. Here at this early stage, we can see that we haven't built up quite enough layers of color to produce a realistic appearance. I feel like a lot of beginners feel like they should get instant results when they use colored pencils. And instead, it's a very patient process of layering that ultimately leads to a realistic appearance. Now we've started to again darken some of the values, this time with a 70% French gray. We'll add some of the small imperfections that happen around the iris, and we'll start to darken up some of the edges of the eye. Now we'll move on to jade green, and we'll start applying this color right over the top of some of the colors that we have in place. As we go, we can switch between the pencils that we've already used to make alterations. Now we'll start burnishing even further and apply a bit of white. This white application will make the values lighter, but it will also add additional layers of wax. As we build up the wax applications on the surface, it becomes a lot easier to add additional colors. Now we'll switch over to dark umber and again continue to darken up some of the values around the eye. You can see as we go and we continue to layer colors, the complexity of the colors begin to develop within the iris. We'll also accentuate some of the imperfections using the dark umber. And then we can make the value even darker with an application of indigo blue. Then it's back with the jade green, covering up the majority of the iris. Strokes are pulled from the outer portion of the iris towards the center, towards the pupil. Then we can go back and start making values lighter again and creating some of the highlights with an application of white. At this point, we're applying the pencil with a heavy amount of pressure. We'll continue to increase the contrast, this time pushing some of the darker values a bit darker. Again, we'll pull applications towards the center of the eye. We'll add a bit of color here with a bit of terracotta. We can go back and make the pupil even darker with a combination of dark umber and indigo blue. We'll also make the values around the outer portion of the eye a bit stronger with the indigo blue as well. We can adjust some of the imperfections and details within the iris using the indigo blue. Now we'll go back and begin refining some of the details even further. We'll add a bit of 70% French gray to make some of the values darker and add additional details, again concentrating our strokes towards the center of the pupil. Now we'll return with the cloud blue that we used initially to strengthen up some of the highlights on the left side of the eye. Then it's back with the jade green to burnish some of these applications. We'll add a bit more color here with a bit of true blue. And then we'll continue to increase the contrast. We'll burnish these applications using the colorless blender and blur the edges around the pupil. And then we'll repeat these steps on our second eye, starting with indigo blue. Our left eye is not quite complete at this point, but I'm sure you can see how important the process of layering is with colored pencils. Seldom will we find the color that we need for our subject in one pencil. Instead, it's usually a combination of colors that results from the layering process. It's also important to remember that we must be patient with our applications. We shouldn't rush the process or get discouraged along the way. Our drawing will go through many stages, and honestly, some of these stages are a little bit discouraging, but we have to work through them and understand that if we're patient and we continue to layer colors, often we'll find successful results. Getting back to our right eye, you can see here that I'm layering down a bit of dark umber to make the values darker. We're using the same colors that we used on the first eye. Now we're going back and burnishing these applications with a colorless blender. The colorless blender is an invaluable tool, but if you don't have one, you can always use a color like cream or white. But keep in mind that by burnishing with these colors, it will make the values slightly lighter. Now we'll add a bit more of that terracotta color to add a little bit more complexity in the color and added interest. Then it's back with our white for some additional burnishing and the addition of a few highlights. Throughout the process, we're constantly evaluating our relationship of contrast between values. Value is the darkness or lightness of a color. Value, of course, is a very important concept in drawing. A way to think about value is to consider your subject without any color. We would still be able to see the subject, we would just see it in black and white. So we would see darks and lights and a full value range of grays in between. We want to make sure that our drawing has a full range of value, meaning it has the darkest darks and lightest lights in between. Now we'll move on to some of the portions around the outside of the eye. We'll start with an application of dark umber, filling in some of the shadowed areas. We'll start again with light application, not putting a whole lot of pressure on the pencil. And before we carry on too far with this process, we'll need to establish some of the locations of the whiskers. These won't be dominant in the finished drawing, but we do need to reserve some space on the paper for them. We'll use a paper clip to create grooves in the surface. This will allow us to make colored pencil applications over the top without them filling in the grooves that we've created. Then we'll start building up the complexity of color around the eyes. We'll start with a bit of the color lilac, and then on top of this, a bit of pink. As you can see, the texture of the paper is showing through these applications, so we'll need to burnish these applications as well. We'll do this initially with an application of 20% cool gray. Then we can again continue to build up the contrast. We'll go over the top of these applications with a bit of dark umber. Progressively, we can start to add additional pressure on the pencil, slowly building up a layer of wax on the surface. We'll go back over our applications with a bit of white. This not only lightens the value in areas, but it adds an additional layer of wax. Now it's back with the lilac, again pulling out some of the color that we laid down initially, and again with the pink as well. Around the edges of the pink shape, we'll add just a touch of Tuscan red. Then it's time to burnish these applications with a colorless blender, and continue to refine some of the details, this time with a touch of dark umber. We'll go back over the dark spot just underneath the eye with an additional application of dark umber. Then with indigo blue, we'll start to make this section appear more black. Again, the combination of dark umber and indigo blue will create a more natural looking black. It's okay if some of the indigo blue shows in areas. It'll just make the shadow appear more natural. Now we'll turn our attention to the right eye, and again we'll follow the same steps, except on this side, less of the lilac and purple is visible. As we go, we might see that we need to make changes to our left eye. As we see these value relationships that need to be addressed, we can simply skip over to our left eye to address them. Even though there's less lilac and pink on our right eye, we'll still add a bit of it just to make sure that our eyes are consistent. Again, we'll slowly get darker with our applications as we become more confident with the colors that we've chosen. Here, again, another application of indigo blue over the top of the dark umber. You can see that this shadowed area looks more natural because of the blue. Now we'll start addressing some of the fur around the eyes. We'll begin by making marks in the direction that the fur grows using a raw umber pencil. We'll progressively build up the illusion of texture by making these directional strokes and layering the pencil applications. Now we'll switch over to 20% French gray and start to add some of the lighter values in between. Again, we'll continue to consider the directional strokes that are made with each of the pencils that we apply in these sections. Now we'll progressively start to build up some of the darker values, starting with a dark umber. Most of the darker values exist just above the nose, but we'll also add some variation in the texture of the fur by adding some darker marks up the bridge of the nose up towards the forehead. We'll also start to address some of the darker values that exist around the nose. We'll go ahead and outline the majority of the nose using the dark umber. We'll also continue to work our way outward from the center of the face. For this drawing, we want to create the appearance as if the face of the cat is coming towards us and fading into the whiteness around it. So we'll allow our strokes to become a bit looser around the edges. We'll darken up some of the values just underneath the nose where it meets the mouth. And we'll add some of the darker spots where the whiskers originate from. Keeping in mind, with every stroke that we make, we're considering the direction that the fur is growing. These directional strokes, of course, will change according to where we are on the face. We'll also consider the length of these strokes as well. In areas where the fur is shorter, our strokes are logically shorter. Where the fur is a bit longer, our strokes should also be a bit longer as well. We'll now begin to add a bit of depth to the color in the fur, starting with an application of sienna brown. This is followed by an application of the color sable. We'll only add these colors in areas where the color is a bit rich, mainly in the center portion of the face. We'll now mute some of the white areas with an application of 20% warm gray. This light gray will still give the appearance of a lighter value, but it will get rid of the starkness of the white of the paper. Then we'll go down to the bottom portion of the nose and start to add a bit of color here. We'll begin with an application of light peach. Then around the edges, we'll add just a touch of Tuscan red to make the value and color slightly darker. Then we can start to refine the details, starting with dark umber. We'll pull some of this dark umber into the body of the shape of the nose, creating a slightly darker value. Then we can burnish these applications using the colorless blender. Now we'll darken things up with an application of indigo blue over the top, again making a more natural looking black. As the contrast is increased, the nose really starts to look like it's coming towards the viewer. We'll add some of the indigo blue and some of the darker areas of the face as well. Then back over the top, a bit more of the dark umber. As we slowly push the contrast between values, we'll also continue to build up the depth of color. An additional application of sable is added in areas, and then over the top, a bit of 20% French gray. Then we'll burnish these applications using the colorless blender. As we apply the colorless blender, we'll continue to think about the directional strokes that are made. So these strokes again flow in the direction that the fur grows. Then it's on to a bit of white to start lightening up some of the areas where the fur is quite a bit lighter. Again, we're thinking about the directional strokes here, pulling the strokes in the direction that the fur grows. Now we need to add a bit of detail to the texture. For this, we'll switch over to an oil-based polychromos pencil, and I'm using a black pencil here. This oil-based pencil is easily applied over the top of the waxy pencils that we've used thus far. This means that our lines are nice and crisp and will not mix with the wax-based pencils that we have in place. Here again, we'll continue working around the face, making directional strokes. Then we can go back with our white Prismacolor, which is a wax-based pencil, and blur some of the edges around the body of the face. This will help to create that impression of the face receding back into the whiteness. We'll also erase any remaining graphite lines that might remain at this point. Now we'll go back with the oil-based polychromos pencil and add a bit of color using burnt sienna. Here again, the strokes that we add here should sit directly over the top of the wax-based pencil applications. We'll also continue adding bits of the black as well. We'll keep our applications around the edges of the face rather loose. This will keep the focus on the eyes and the nose of the cat. We'll continue adding a few loose strokes to the top portion of the head and pull out a few indications of some whiskers. As it's needed, we'll add a few more indications of color in this section. Here, a bit of sable is added. We'll use a bit of the sable on the left side of the face as well. Then it's back with the white for additional burnishing and to smooth the transition from darker tones to the lighter white background. We'll continue adding a bit more indication of some texture using the black polychromos pencil. We can also pull out a few more indications of some darker whiskers. We can also further define some of the texture and details around the eyes, and make a few of the values above the nose a little bit darker. Now we're ready to pull out some of those really strong highlights that exist around the eyes. We'll use a bit of gouache here. Gouache is opaque watercolor, and it goes right over the top of our colored pencil applications. We'll apply the gouache with a minimal amount of water used so that the color is very strong. We'll apply it using a nylon script liner brush for added control. We'll need to make sure that our highlights are consistent with our light source, which originates from the upper left-hand corner. This means we'll have strong highlights in the upper left-hand portion of the eye, but also on the right side of the bottom portion of the eye and inside of the tear duct. Now we'll add some of our finishing touches of color here with a bit of burnt ochre, and then a few more details are added with the black pencil. To pull out a few indications of white fur over the top, we'll use our gouache to go over the top of the colored pencil applications. Only a few applications are made right down the center of the bridge of the nose. And now our colored pencil drawing of cat's eyes is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then I know that you'll enjoy being a member at thevirtualinstructor.com. Our comprehensive membership program includes video courses on drawing and painting, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, weekly critiques, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. And if you want to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so. Just click on the link on your screen now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.